It was 2 weeks before Christmas in 1995 when patrolman Todd Bonner received a call that would haunt him for the rest of his career. The kind of call that you never forget, the kind that follows you home, sits at your dinner table, and wakes you up at 3 a.m. for years afterward. A farmer in Utah's Wasatch County had stumbled upon something gruesome along the secluded stretch of the Provo River. The kind of place that most people never go. Remote, quiet, the sort of spot you might expect to find deer tracks or a fallen tree. Not this. A young woman, barely out of her teens, lay beaten to death. The scene was so violent, so brutal, that it looked like she had fought for every single breath. And she had. There was no gun, no knife, just 6 bloody rocks scattered around her. 6. Some of these rocks weighed as much as 70 pounds. Whoever did this didn't bring a weapon. They used whatever was available, and they used it until there was nothing left to use it on. Forensic investigators would later describe the scene as a crime of opportunity fueled by pure, uncontrolled rage. But amidst the horror, they found something that stopped every investigator cold. Just 10 feet from the body, a pair of black socks sat folded neatly on a rock. Not tossed aside, not ripped off in a hurry. Folded, deliberately, carefully, like someone had taken a moment in the middle of a violent killing to pause and do something almost domestic. Why would anyone do that? It was a question that would define this entire case. A question that would take 21 years, a forensic breakthrough, and one discarded cigarette butt to finally answer. But before any of that, investigators had to figure out who this woman was. At first, 2 men, a cab driver and a boyfriend, identified her as Tracy Marie Beslanovich. The name went into the report, the case began moving forward, and the officer, Todd Bonner, made a routine phone call to the stepfather in Washington State. What he heard made his stomach drop. Tracy was standing right next to him, alive, confused about why the police were calling, completely unaware that someone had died in her name. The victim wasn't Tracy. The victim was Crystal, Tracy's older sister. Crystal had been using her younger sister's name as a street name, a protective alias, a way to keep some small wall between the person she had to be and the person that she actually was. She'd been working, turning tricks in Salt Lake City, operating within a 7-block radius that she rarely, if ever, left. She was a primary earner in a life that she desperately wanted out of. Friends and people who knew her described her as a woman who was exhausted, a woman trying to survive a situation that felt impossible to escape. That made the next question even harder. How did Crystal, a woman who moved within 7 blocks of downtown Salt Lake City, end up dead 50 miles away, alone, on the banks of a river in the middle of nowhere? Detectives didn't have to look far for their first suspect. A local cab driver by the name of Clarence Stonehawker had known Crystal well, too well. He wasn't just a client. He told people that he was in love with her. He wanted to marry her. To investigators, that kind of obsessive attachment looked like a motive. He said if he couldn't have her, no one could. A man who was convinced of a love the woman didn't share. A fantasy that curdled into something dangerous. And then came the detail about the socks. Crystal's friends were specific about this. She always kept her socks on. Always. It was a habit, a boundary, something consistent about her that everyone who knew her could confirm. The fact that the socks had been removed and then folded neatly and placed on a rock nearby told investigators one of 2 things. Either the killer knew Crystal personally and knew her habits intimately, or the killer had removed them deliberately as an act of control, of humiliation, of dominance over a woman who was no longer able to resist. Either way, it pointed towards someone who knew her. Stonehawkers stayed in their sights. But in this kind of case, suspicion isn't enough. You need evidence. And in 1995, the evidence they had was limited. For 13 years, the case sat in a file. Detectives hadn't forgotten it. Cold cases like this have a way of staying alive in the minds of the people who work them. But without a break, without new technology, there was nowhere to go. Crystal Beslanovich was another name on a list that grows longer every year. Women who deserve justice and women the system couldn't yet deliver it to. Then, in 2008, the department made a decision. They spent $15,000, a significant gamble for a cold case budget, sending the rocks to a private forensic lab for DNA testing. This was the best technology available at the time. Traditional swabs, careful collection, and standard procedure. They got a profile, a real DNA profile extracted from those bloody rocks after more than a decade. Investigators were certain they had their man. They ran the profile against what they had, and they held their breath. The DNA didn't match Clarence Stonehawker. The case went cold again. This time, the silence lasted almost another decade. Crystal's killer was out there, living a life, breathing air, going about his days completely untouched by what he had done on that riverbank in December of 1995. Violators can hide, but technology marches on. And in 2010, it changed because of a machine designed to make sure your food is safe to eat. It's called the MVAC, the Micro Vacuum and Collection System. A wet vacuum device originally developed for the food industry to detect contamination on surfaces. What makes it remarkable in a forensic context is this. It doesn't swab, it scrubs. It creates a seal over the surface and vacuums up everything microscopic hiding in the pores, the cracks, and the uneven texture of the rough stone. The places a cotton swab can never reach. When investigators ran the MVAC over the same rocks that they had tested in 2008, the results were staggering. The system extracted 40 times more DNA material than the previous method yielded. 40 times. Not a small improvement, a total transformation of what was possible. The new sample went into the National CODIS database, the FBI's combined DNA index system that holds profiles of convicted offenders across the country. And a name came back: Joseph Michael Simpson. Investigators pulled his record. What they found sent a chill through the room. Simpson was not a stranger to violence. He was a convicted murderer, and he had been released on parole just before Crystal Beslanovich was killed. And at the time of her death, he had been working as an airport shuttle driver. His route ran right past the stretch of the Provo River where Crystal's body was found. He had the history, he had the access, he had the timing. But investigators knew that a DNA match from a database wasn't enough on its own. Defense attorneys could challenge it, and juries could doubt it. They needed confirmation, something undeniable. They tracked Simpson all the way to Florida, where he had been living for years, far from that cold case that had never officially reached him. Detectives watched him. They waited, and they were patient in the way that people become patient when they've spent 20 years waiting for a moment like this. Simpson lit a cigarette. He finished it. He dropped it on the ground and walked away. That was the moment. Investigators moved in, retrieved the cigarette butt, they extracted the DNA from it, they compared it against the profile from the rocks, against the evidence collected that December morning in 1995, and it was a perfect match. In September of 2016, 21 years after Crystal Beslanovich was found on the banks of the Provo River, Joseph Michael Simpson stood in a courtroom and heard the verdict. Guilty of aggravated murder. Sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Crystal's story didn't end there. Her friend Karen, a woman who'd been following the case, who she knew from the streets of Salt Lake City, who followed her on the long road to justice beside her memory, made a decision of her own. She'd left that life behind. She turned it around. She credits Crystal and the people who refused to stop fighting for her as the reason why. For Officer Todd Bonner, a man who took the call on that cold December morning and carried Crystal's face with him for more than 2 decades, there was finally something that he hadn't allowed himself to expect. Closure. A food safety vacuum, a discarded cigarette, and 21 years of someone refusing to look away. That is how you solve the unsolvable.